Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting Michael and me here today. I'm delighted to be here with Michael McMillan. Samara has done some really good work over the last number of years, and they should be applauded for it because there's not a lot of research into democratic institutions, into our parliamentary system of government that's taken place in the last couple of decades. And so they've really stepped into the void with their own research and their own empirical data to highlight the state of our institutions, which should concern all of us in this room. So kudos to Samara for the work that they've done. I encourage you to buy their book, Tragedy in the Commons. It's a really good read, and I think it really highlights the challenges that we face. Let me tell you a little bit about myself for some context. I'm Michael Chong. I'm a federal member of parliament. I represent a riding called Wellington-Halton Hills, which is about an hour west of the city. I've represented that riding for the last 10 years, and I've fought in 5 general elections, so I've been around the block. But I've also actually called this neighborhood for home for 15 years. I went to the University of Toronto and just down the street, and lived just a couple blocks north of here, and lived here for 15 years, met my wife down here, so this is my old neighborhood, so I'm glad to be back at my second home, so it's wonderful to be here. I served in Parliament for 10 years and through 5 general elections, and I tell you that because it's given me an eye-opening experience about the state of your Parliament and your democratic institutions. I think it's clear that decades of changes through different governments and different parties have really weakened your democracy, to the point where today I think it's arguable to say that Canada has one of the weakest democratic systems of government in the modern Western world. We have a highly centralized leader system where almost all the power in Ottawa rests in the various party leaders, and very little of it rests in your democratically elected legislature. So why should you care? The theme of your group. Why should you care about the concentration of power in Ottawa? Well, quite simply, for the following reason. I argue that our society's most important achievement, its most important invention, its most important accomplishment, whatever you want to call it, is our democracy. And more specifically, not just the fact that you have the right to vote, because we've exported democracy to the various parts in the world, but their societies still aren't the kind of societies we have today. So it's not just about the right to vote. What is integral to a democracy, what is essential to a democracy and to democratic institutions, is this basic concept that power should not be concentrated in any one person or in any small group of people, but that it should be widely distributed in democratic institutions. That power should have checks and balances. And so the whole theoretical construct of our democratic system of government, whether it's here in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, and other places around the world, the key concept in our democracy is that there are checks and balances on power between the executive branch, in our case the Prime Minister and his cabinet, the legislative branch, in our case the House of Commons, and the judicial branch of government. And that these checks and balances on power ensure that we live in just, stable, and prosperous societies. And I would argue that the prosperity, that the justice, that the stability that we enjoy as Canadians is based on that foundation of these democratic checks and balances of power. Without that foundation, in the long run, all of that stability, all of that prosperity, all of that justice starts to crumble. And you just have to look around the world to see the empirical proof of it. The most prosperous, stable, and just societies are all societies where they have strong democratic institutions with checks and balances on power. There are societies that have become prosperous, that have become stable through authoritarian means, but I strongly believe that in the long run, they will fall flat on their face. Because in the long run, nothing will sustain that other than this foundation of democratic checks and balances on power. So, last December, I introduced the Reform Act in the House of Commons, which attempts to rewrite the imbalance of power in Ottawa. Essentially, in my experience, there are 3 fundamental reasons why Ottawa is broken. The 3 fundamental reasons are the following. First, over the decades, nomination processes have changed in this country to give party leaders the final say on who the party candidate will be in each and every general election. And so today in Canada, we are the only Western democracy where by law, party leaders have the final approval or the final veto over who the party candidate will be in each and every riding, in each and every election. It's unprecedented. It never existed in Canada before October 1970, and it doesn't exist in any other Western democracy. The second reason why we find ourselves in this state today is that over the decades, party caucuses have changed. They are governed by unwritten rules, and these party unwritten caucus rules have evolved in a way that have centralized the power in the party leader and weakened the ability of your local elected member of parliament to act on your behalf in Ottawa. And the third reason why our system has fundamentally changed is that we are unique amongst Westminster parliamentary democracies in that we have severed the election of the party leader by the party caucus. For generations in Canada, the party leader was elected by elected members of provincial parliament and elected members of federal parliament. We went away from that system decades ago in Canada, and so now party leaders are no longer accountable in the same way they once were to their party caucuses. They're elected by a party membership, usually a one-time thing, and that party membership then disappears, and the party leader then is no longer accountable to his or her own caucus. And so as a result of these three things, the weakening of local control over party nominations, the weakening of caucus as a decision-making body, and the lack of accountability of party leaders to their respective caucuses, we have the state of affairs we have today. And so the Reform Act proposes to do three things. Remove the party leader veto and approval over party candidates and restore that control more locally. Secondly, define caucus rules in writing so that the chair of caucus is elected, that members can only be expelled upon a secret ballot vote. And thirdly, it proposes to write down the rules for the review and replacement of the party leader by caucus. And what those three things will do, I believe, is strengthen our House of Commons, your only elected legislature, and restore the balance of power in Ottawa so that we have better checks and balances of power. And in the long run, if we want to sustain the prosperity that we have inherited, because let's face it, the prosperity and the wealth and the justice we enjoy today in Canada isn't because of our hard work alone in the last 10 years or 20 years. We stand on the shoulders of giants, of people who came before us, who built these institutions, who fought for checks and balances on power. And if we want to sustain the kind of society we enjoy today, we have to renew our parliament and renew our democratic institutions. And if we do so, I have no doubt that we will compete with the best in the world in the 21st century. Thank you very much.